Chapter 7 Life with the Dowsed. That next morning, one of the hounds gave birth to 8 malnourished pups. Marlowe had been busy most of the sunrise on a rickety ladder, fixing some of the burnt spots on the huts from the night before. He handed down bundles of black straw, caking his hands with charcoal dust, clapped it off, and took fresh bundles handed up to him by Carno, the village carpenter. One of the hound hands came by and admired the men's work.
"Looking good there, Mr. Ambassador," said the hound hand, blocking the sun from his eyes. "Y'all want to get a break from up there? We just had some pups squeeze out of one of our mamas. They're really cute, smell good and fresh, too."
Carno turned around, the burn around his left eye gleaming in the sun like black paint.
"We'd love to, Freddy. Mind giving us a hand right quick?"
"What do you need?" asked the boyish man.
"If you'd be kind,"
Marlowe said from up above, the sun silhouetting him. "I need a glass of that rain blood I got with Helga yesterday morning. We still have some left over from last night?"
Sure, I can do that for you, if there's some left. You want some too?"
Carno set a hand on the hound hand's shoulder.
"I'd be most appreciative, Freddy." "Salutely. I'll get right back with both them waters."
Carno looked back up at Marlowe as Freddy left.
"They're good people, Mar. I know it's been a little rough, but you'll see soon, I hope. Titanus had the same kind of reserves about us at the start, but he changed the longer he lived here."
"Ah," the counselor waved it away. He fished out the last bits of burnt straw. His eyes wandered to the other huts needing done. Pyros. No wonder they're called that, he thought. How the Dowsed managed to keep taking them on almost every day was beyond him. He climbed down the ladder.
"I know Titanus wouldn't have spoken so highly of you of this place if he didn't mean it." "Glad you see it that way."
Carno clapped him on the back. It made his back tingle, a bit with sharp pain, a bit more with fellowship. He'd been off by himself for so long that he'd forgotten what it was like to be around others, especially ones with such humbled demeanors and love of hard work. Carno, the village's carpenter, had been the 5th person to ask for the counselor's help. The man who looked after the village's bones with great care, installing new materials as often as needed. So long as there was fire, not long after there'd be Carno, keeping all the huts pristine. The only time the village looked like it had been attacked was during the attack. Hef's hut was his local masterpiece, but despite how much nicer it was, thatched roofs covered everything just the same. Marlowe had already helped grab wild grass yesterday. He was starting to see how the supply chain worked for such a barren place, despite the apparent lack of any economy. A black tattoo, or burn, he couldn't tell, in the winding, daggered edges of some ritualistic shape, graced Carno's face with a deep tone that rivaled even Hef's body. His hair was short and spiked, drenched in sweat. His eyes rolled over and showed their bellies. The trust he radiated set Marlowe at ease, and when the two had first met, he knew this Dowsed had been different, like Helga. Perhaps they were all like that, he thought, once you got to know him, as Carno said.
"Come on, let's get this next one done. Then we'll go check out them pups, huh?"
Marlowe nodded without a word, sliding fingers through his sweat-flaked hair. He picked up the ladder, avoiding splinters, set it on the hut next door, and started up it. Freddy came back no more than a couple exchanges of burned for fresh straw later, with 2 wooden mugs of warm water in his hands. Carno took them and handed one up to Marlowe before sipping his own.
"You both promised to come look at the pups soon?"
Freddy asked like a begging kid. Carno nodded, wiped his mouth.
"We'll be right over, Fred."
Freddy beamed.
"All right, I'll go get it ready for you."
The counselor turned around on the ladder, leaning into it, looking out over the village as Freddy waved up at him and left. He sighed at the fluid flowing down his pipes, then squinted at the distance. The sand and sky warred with each other, blurring into no man's land on the horizon. Doyle's flaming eye lit up his mind like a flashbulb, as if the burned man was out there in the desert, watching back through a pair of mirrored binoculars. Marlowe shivered and shook the ladder. His heart leapt up his throat, and he nearly dumped his mug. He caught himself and chuckled uneasily.
"All right up there?"
Carno asked in between sorting the bundles of straw on a rickety wagon.
Fine, just a little heat stroke."
He cracked a weak smile, hands shaking against the ladder.
"That's how I know it'll be a cool day."
He picked up another package of straw and smiled a gritty set of browning chompers.
"Sure,"
Marlowe said, recoiling at the dirty teeth. Mind falling away from Doyle for a moment, but the second he dropped his guard, the burning face flowed back. Not burnt, not finished, actively cooking from out of his skull. Marlowe cringed at the thought.
Hey!
Carno snapped his fingers.
What are you doing up there with your head in the clouds? I know you're a Polly, but that don't mean you can just live up there. Come on, I want to hold one of them pups, you hear?
I hear you, he said. He took the bundle of straw and nestled it into the roof, rooting out the burned thatch for the fresh stuff. The burning of the friend's stuff, the burning in his friend's skull, the burning coming out of his head. His pup was the first one he had seen when they got to the wire pens where the mutts were resting under the shade of planks set atop the cages. A black puppy with white on its chest. Its eyes were squeezed shut, little pink mouth opening and closing, trying to speak. Surrounded by its brothers and sisters, all skin and bones, nursing as fast as possible. Freddie went in and stroked the mother's head. She looked up in confusion at the tiny critters, sucking on her teats, looking to the hound hand for answers.
Strange being a mama, ain't it? He said.
She seemed to nod.
Who's it that knocked you up, girlie? Was it Rex?
He looked at the grizzled male lounging in the sun. He turned to the men.
So, y'all want to hold one? Or two?
He smiled, showing off his toys.
I don't think we should pull them off their mother, Marlowe started, but Carno elbowed him.
Oh, he'd love to, Freddie, Carno said for him.
Freddie windmilled his arm. Well, come on in here then.
They stepped through the latch gate, taking it slow so the other dogs didn't see them as a threat. Marlowe was afraid the dogs would discriminate, smell the council on him, but they treated him like he was a desert dweller all the same.
Good pups,
he whispered with a raised hand.
They ain't gonna bite you.
Freddie nudged one of the pups off the mama and handed it to Carno, who took it like a vial of nitroglycerin. He held it close to his chest, the little thing silently crying and pawing for more food.
Ain't she just a cutie?
Freddie faced Marlowe.
Want to hold one too?
Yes, I'd love to, actually. His eyes floated on the one with white on its chest. His neck hair stood on end when Freddie grabbed and offered it to him like a loaf of bread out of the oven. Marlowe took it, coddling the thing's bottom like a sack of flour. Glossy slits looked up into his eyes. It hiccuped a squeaky bark.
I see you like that one. He kind of likes you too,
Freddie boasted with a smile, hands on his hips.
Say, what do y'all think? Was I right? Pretty cute, ain't they?
Quite a bit, Carno said. He handed the puppy back.
We should get back to work, Fred. Thanks for the water and the pups.
He turned to Marlowe, who didn't look like he wanted to let go.
Come on, counselor. He'll be here if you want to visit again.
Taking the puppy from the counselor's hands was like taking the trophy from first place. But he let go when he remembered the huts waiting for them.
Yeah, I guess so.
We still got work to do, he said, more to convince himself than either of the men.
Come back any time. Never know, with the way that pup yapped at you, I'd say you've got a friend for life. Hunting dog, maybe.
Freddie glanced up from the nursing mother. The counselor's heart jumped.
Really? Sure. I'd be happy to let you keep him. You know, when he's big enough. You'll have to keep him fed. They grow fast.
Of course. Thank you. Freddie, was it?
Yes, sir.
He stood. They shook hands.
Ready?
Carno said at the gate. Marlowe looked back at him with a bit of irritation, but decided he was right. Yeah, we should get going. I'll try to come back after.
Be sure you do.
The hound hand smiled and waved as the carpenters went back to patching roofs. Marlowe would be back up on the ladder, but instead of thinking about getting the work done or what it would be like if he saw Doyle parading across the sand in the daylight, he was instead thinking of that puppy, beginning to like this place more now that he'd met a dog. He snagged a splinter in his thumb on the way up. That evening, after he bid Carno goodbye and went back to play with the puppies until someone else came to him for work, Marlowe made his way through the village, checking on everyone as they wandered off to bed. They still gave him untrusting looks as they shut their doors, but nothing so spiteful as when he first arrived. Faces had softened either from the horrors of last night or the eventual way barriers crumble the longer someone's around. Whatever it was, he'd take it. He came to Hef's hut, drawn by the light flickering from the lanterns within, and approached the door, hand grazing the side of the hut, when a voice called out to him.
Come inside if you are in need of my attention, rather than skulk around in the dark.
Marlowe poked his head through the door and waved at Hef meditating on his bed of coals. Sherpa, he said, stepping through the door.
Counselor, the burn man replied, to what do I owe your appearance before me tonight?
About to tuck in, hoping my work doesn't go to waste again. I wanted to thank you for giving me a place to sleep while I'm here.
Yes, well, Titanus occupied the place before you. Never had much of a chance to clean it out, what with the frequency of the pyro's attacks and all,
he replied without opening his eyes. Smoke and white particulates of ash swirled around him as he moved his legs.
I hope he left it in order for his successor.
Had he thought he'd have one, I suppose he would have.
Yes, it was sudden.
Marlowe nodded. He approached the meditating leader, keeping his hands visible. I've been meaning to ask you, Hef raised what looked like an eyebrow, hard to tell with all the char on his face. What did you think of him, of Titanus? Was he as good to your people as they say he was? Hef's eye opened, its diamond sheen reflecting the universe.
Does the desert thirst for clouds where they are not found? Yes, the counselor held our favor, just as the desert pushes away a nimbus. Natural results. I fear for the lack of another in his league. No slight against you, you understand.
You fear that? Marlowe asked, biting at the question. Both of Hef's eyes opened, his hands settled on his knees as he spoke.
Not so much fear, but consideration. We are in desperate times, counselor. But your people would not know much of that, would they?
We have faced difficulties. We remember the war.
War. Yes, what a war it must have been for the council.
You don't believe me? Marlowe asked, still standing. Hef didn't reply as he closed his eyes again. He only gestured before him. Sit, he seemed to say. So Marlowe did, antsy as he folded his legs under himself. He leaned forward on his palms covering his knees. What then of your past with us? Marlowe fidgeted as his eyes tried boring into the Sherpas. I've only read a bit on what happened.
Speak as if you know it, and I will correct where you are wrong.
You people have achieved enlightenment since swearing off the flame, right? Or so you claim. What's it been like, trying to live a smothered life? Did you make any headway with Titanus about your beliefs? Hef stayed quiet, considering the questions as if his answers would bring him harm.
You ask, but you provide nothing of your own. Always accusations, and yet I may not do the same to you?
Marlowe's head tilted at the question. So ask me if you want to know so bad.
The council presumes duty falls to it to propose who suffers under the destructive rains. But what truth may be found when your king has never communed with the mother, the one whom we all share a connection? Endowed with holy purpose, he says, but what divinity issued its blessing, and when? Titanus spoke often of the council's willingness to stand up for the weak, but that presumes our agency in this world where we are a dying species. Humanity and its ilk are nothing but obstacles for the drench. What entitles the council to say different? False blessing?
His eyes shone as he retorted. Marlowe breathed out, reeling but unable to grapple with the burned man's reply. Who else is going to fight the drench, then?
Pyros? A world without water, they argue, should elevate us all and undo our current apocalypse. And you consider them terrorists.
To the Dowsed, definitely. Do you not do the same? Hef shrugged.
It matters not to what they are, what we call them. I would prefer a life of solitude and to think myself into oblivion if given the chance. Your civilization's intervention has kicked their nest, spilling them over into ours.
So you think that if the council kept to itself, you'd never have this problem? Didn't they radicalize from you?
Where do you think they learned to trust the universal fever?
The flame is a tool, Marlowe said, leaning forward. He started to sweat from the coals. The council uses it to give the world a chance to survive, not to strip away its water until there's none left.
I fail to see a difference between cloud killing and vaporizing lakes.
A river can't hurt you like a drench can.
Unless you trip and drown in the current trying to cross it,
Hef said. Marlowe nibbled his lips, trying to think of a witty response to the Sherpa's dismissal of an entire way of life. His way of life. Although that kind of talk was expected, since Hef had been the one who led the Dowsed away from the city all those years ago. No surprise the revolutionary was sharp-tongued. The Pyros had become a new challenge, an actual threat unlike the humble pacifists in the desert. These Dowsed wanted nothing more than to be left alone, but the Pyros, they wanted to burn it all. Last night made that clear. Though without the man challenging his view sitting before him now, they would have accomplished just that. At least here in the desert. Marlowe felt a spark of disdain for the Sherpa, but he couldn't help but feel grateful at the same time for him. So even with all that, you believe Titanus was a good man?
For a counselor.
Hef's tone settled down.
He came here on foot and went to work the moment he stepped into our village. No showmanship, nor confusion on his purpose.
I can understand your disappointment then, Marlowe said, gulping.
Empathy is a beast one rarely wishes to wrestle if they are untrained. I commend your effort, counselor.
Hef smiled. That set Marlowe at ease. He loosened his shoulders and relaxed without letting down his guard. It must have hurt you pretty bad when you found out, too.
Titanus's death came to me as no great surprise, not after he spent his tombstone on idiotic grandiosity.
Yes, that mountain will never regrow because of his grandiosity. He would have rather used a nicer word, something akin to legendary rather than arrogance. The man had been arrogant, some might have said, but he was no pushover either. If anything, he deserved to be haughty. He could back it up, unlike the rest of those counselors who came back with stories embellished by the wild. Only thing they brought back was sunburn and drizzle. But Titanus? Man was as legendary as they came.
Why waste a second chance at life on such frivolous excitement? Were I to believe that his celebrations seemed capable of such high energy without need for hubris, I would speak of his errors more gently. But his pomposity in company with your kind seemed external to his true self. He rarely committed such deeds before the Dowsed.
Marlowe looked like he'd eaten bad fish. What would he have to gain by acting differently? Hef shrugged.
Perhaps he felt more at home here than anywhere else. He was the one who gave us the structure of the civilized life without forcing us into the same beliefs. He may have fought during the war between our people, but he was not ignorant of our reasoning.
A good man, then?
You do not sound surprised. Although I believe our perspectives might reveal different testimonies about the man's capabilities. The Council has a tendency to encourage the poor traits of its heroes. Although we dealt with his amnesia long after his acts in the east on the mountain, Tombstone wiped nearly everything out of him. You can thank his partner for restoring him.
Rosalind, Marlowe said. Viceroy.
Yes, the successor to the throne.
Hef shrugged again and shook his head.
Whatever she calls herself, she restored his connections with your people and ours. You are our third ambassador were I to value semantics more.
How did you come to speak this way, Hef? I've been here for a couple days and no one talks like you do. In fact, their words are careless compared to yours. Hef chuckled.
You may sit a man before words and demand he learn them, but you cannot gentrify his spirit to use them. It was your librarian with whom I spent many nights, studying all he could recover from the wilds. Texts incite the mind to action, to force light into the darkened corners. I got the idea to break from the city from him, as peacefully as we could, I suppose.
Great job with that, Marlowe crossed his arms.
Did you live through the war?
Hef replied, almost accusingly.
Yet you judge it?
Well, I have heard the history.
From mouths on your side, yes.
He looked at the lanterns drawing down from around the room, moonlight coming through the cracks in the walls.
I wish we could continue this, as productive as it has been, but you should get some rest, as should I. We're liable to be attacked again soon.
Kicking me out? Marlowe asked, groaning as he got up. His knees popped. Let's hope they don't come back tonight.
Indeed. We may speak more, but for now I am bested by your presence. Return when you have gained more of my people's trust, and then I will lecture you on the events so widely missed by your place in history.
Marlowe looked down as he got to his feet. Thank you, Hef. I'm sorry to have been brash, but you must understand. I am a product of my society.
More than you know, eager flame.
He smiled, dismissed the counselor to the night. The lantern dowsed as soon as Marlowe left, the night taking hold of the village's throat and squeezing as all the other lights went out around him. He meandered to his hut and lay down on the hairless pelt. Town went quiet soon after.